we talk about faith, believing in God, but did you have a moment where is there really a God, and how did you come to terms with that?
If I were to sit here and say it didn't affect my faith, I'd be lying because it did. It
Yeah,
it it rattled our cages,
you
and
wouldn't be human if it didn't.
right, exactly. Well, I talked to my pastor, and one of the things he told me, 5 or 6 years after the fact, he said one of the things that I admire about you is that you didn't allow it to destroy your faith.
Welcome to the Valiant Forge Podcast, where we help men overcome life's battles, show up better in the world, and become a valiant warrior for God. This is a place where we share practical strategies that will equip you on life's journey to help you become the man God has called you to be. Are you ready to overcome your doubt and fulfill your purpose just like Gideon? If so, let's go.
Welcome back to the Valiant Forge Podcast. Today, I had a conversation with James Moffitt. He is the host of 3 different podcasts. One is called ABCs of Adult Parenting. Another one is called The Father's Refuge. And a third one called Liberty and Gun Rights. We have a really deep conversation around all 3 podcasts, but we really get into grief and loss. The Father's Refuge is a podcast that he runs that was birthed out of the loss of 2 children. Yes, James has lost 2 children of his own. And we really get into the weeds on dealing with grief and loss from a faith perspective. And it's really powerful. James is a very open guy. Like, after we did this interview, him and I have become very good friends. We talk on a daily basis almost now. So, we even started another podcast, but maybe I'll get into that at the end of the episode, or I'll link it in the show notes. But yeah, it's a really great conversation, but we really get deep into loss and grief and ways to deal with that from a faith perspective. If you're trying to learn how you can walk through suffering without walking alone, this conversation is for you. Here's my conversation with James Moffitt. James, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So is this your first or second guest or interview now that you've done where you're on another podcast?
Yeah, I think it's the second one.
Nice. I know you've been podcasting for a long time, but it's a little different being on the other side of the mic.
Yes, it is. I don't know, it's different, but it's kind of freeing in that I don't have to orchestrate anything or come up with questions or all of the post-production stuff. So it makes it a little more fun.
Yeah. So do you have 2 podcasts or 3?
3.
3. And what are they?
3 is enough.
One is enough for me so far.
Yeah. I started out with ABC's of Parenting Adult Children podcast. And it's in support of my Parenting Adult Children Facebook group, which is a private support group for parents on Facebook. And we started out in 2015, back when our kids were 2 of our children were still teenagers, a boy and a girl, and they were giving us a run for our money. And I desperately didn't want to wind up in prison or get a boyfriend or anything. And so I told my wife, I said, hey, we were on Facebook and social media. And I said, hey, let's start a Facebook support group for parents to see if anybody else is dealing with this stuff. And lo and behold, yes, there are. And we started out with 10 members. And I think today we have like 1.4 thousand members.
Wow.
And I also have a subreddit on Reddit called Parenting Adult Children. And that's just kind of blown up, taking a life of its own. And so the podcast is there to provide encouragement and support for parents of adult children. And then I have Liberty and Gun Rights, which is a Second Amendment gun safety, gun education sort of podcast that's kind of part of my life. I've been doing that for a long time. And then recently, after having a doctor on my parenting podcast, we talked off air about, my losing two children and Jessica Ann back in 2001 and my son Jeremy in 2025. And she was like, James, you have a lot to share and you ought to crank up a podcast for that. And I'd already had Father's Refuge, which is my third podcast, in mind, and I'd always wanted to breathe some life into that, and I
Mm.
just never could get it off the ground. Not virtually speaking, but in real life, support groups or whatever. And so I thought, well, this is perfect. Podcast would be perfect for that. And so it's like 2 months old, and I've already gotten 500 downloads as of today for
Wow.
Buzzsprout. Yeah, I was like, I got that email from Buzzsprout. I was like, what? Because I don't think I had, but I don't know, 125 downloads. Because it's so new, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, I've had close to 20 episodes on that so far. Had some really good episodes, and
Wow.
yeah.
So can you walk me through what it was like a little bit to lose two children? Maybe tell the story of how that came about.
Well, August the 5th of 2001 is when my daughter Jessica passed away, and we went through a 14-month treatment journey at MUSC Children's Hospital in downtown Charleston, South Carolina, and she had a baseball-sized tumor in her head, and part of it was wrapped around her brainstem. So when they did emergency surgery back in uh 2001, no 2000, it was at the end of 2000, I guess, whatever 14 months is, right? Um, the surgeons came out and gave us no hope. They said we were able to get a lot of it out, but because part of it's wrapped around her brainstem, it's pretty much a death sentence. That's not what they said, but they basically gave her no hope and said if she lasted 12 months, uh, that we would be very lucky. And so she lasted 14 months. And she was 10 years old, and she would have been 11 years old on September the 11th when the World Trade Center came down. Well, she
Wow.
passed away on August the 5th. So when September 11th rolls around, it has a dual meaning for us.
Mm.
Um, it's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Uh, Watching one of your children uh, get progressively worse, and dealing with the 6 stages of grief and anger and denial and anxiety and bargaining with God and all these things. At the outset, we had a lot of hope. We our hope was that Jesus would heal her on this side of heaven, right? And we desperately clung to the fact that Jessica belonged to us. And the realization over a period of time came to me that, and probably to my wife too, that our children don't belong to us. They belong to God, right? They are with us for a season, right? And God blesses us with the privilege and the honor to to raise those children, right?
Right.
And that was a hard thing for me to swallow when I came to the realization that she's not mine. She doesn't belong to me. She belongs to God, and it's God's, whatever God's will is to do with her life is God's will, not my will, right? And so, uh, if you probably haven't listened to any of the episodes on Father's Refuge yet, but one of the episodes is called "Crazy Man on the Side of the Road" or something like that. And I spent a lot of time with a beer in one hand and a fist in the air, with the other,
Right.
angry with God and asking him why he was taking her, that if anybody needed to die, it would be me because I was the worm and she wasn't, and all of these things. And there was we had a parent support group that we went to at MUSC. I forget what it was called, but parents with children that were, going through the treatment journey. were with us, and of course, after she passed away, we couldn't go to that support group anymore. I guess we could have, but I don't think any of the parents would have wanted us there, right? Because we'd have been a kind of a stark reminder of what option B might be for them, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a song that Casting Crowns came out with, I think back in 2017 or something like that. It's called "Praise You in the Storm."
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with that song, it talks about a storm, right?
Right.
And I, in my mind's eye, in my spirit, I kind of latched onto that song, and I kind of latched on to the symbolism of the storm, and related it to what we were going through. And initially, when she first got sick and she started her treatments, the storm was far off. We were on the beach. The storm was far off. It was a thunderstorm. There was lots of lightning, lots of thunder, blah blah blah. And so we knew it was there. We saw it coming, and it got as time went on, it got closer and closer, right? And it got to the point where we were like right in the middle of it. Driving
Yeah.
rain, wind, lightning, looking for God and all of that. Why me, Lord? You know. Um, so yeah, it was pretty deep. I guess you could say, if anything in my life shook the foundation of my faith, that was it. Right? You hear people all around us in the world, when you watch NBC Nightly News, or you watch any kind of news station. There's all this shootings and people dying all around the world, and people dying of hunger, of malaria, of all different types of things that affect mankind, right? And you hear people all the time go, well, if there's a God, why does he allow that to happen?
Right.
Why does God allow rape and incest happen? Why does God allow school shootings to happen? Why does God allow this or that? Right. And so I was there, right? I'm like, why are you doing
Right.
this? Why me?
Yeah.
Why her? And it it could very easily have destroyed our faith in who God was, right? And if I were to sit here and say it didn't affect my faith, I'd be lying, because it did. It
Yeah.
it it rattled our cages,
You
and
wouldn't be human if it didn't.
right, exactly. Well, I talked to my pastor, and one of the things he told me, 5 or 6 years after the fact, he said, one of the things that I admire about you is that you didn't allow it to destroy your faith.
Mm.
I didn't really know how to respond to that. I just kind of received it and said, okay.
Yeah.
And but anyway.
Yeah. You actually answered a lot of the questions that I had for you around that,
Oh, okay.
which is, how you struggled with your faith during that time. Did you have a moment where we talk about faith, believing in God, but did you have a moment where, is there really a God? And how did you come to terms with that?
um I don't think I ever doubted that there was a God. I got saved when I was 18 years old, back in 79 or 80. And so I had a pretty strong foundation of who God's identity is, and is in my life, right?
Yeah.
That's not to say I'm a perfect Christian or that I've got it all figured out. And I think we all go through a period of sanctification from the time that we're born again until the time that we come face to face with our Creator, right? Uh, but hopefully we're being slowly but surely made into His image, and so thankfully I did have a pretty firm foundation, right? And I had I've spent a lot of time studying the Bible, studying the Greek, Hebrew, and Latin languages, and I've been blessed to go to churches and preach the word, and spent 10 years in street ministry, and have, I spent 45 days in a street rescue mission in Houston, Texas when I was in my early 20s. God had to kind of get my attention back then,
Mm.
which he did. And because of that, I wound up doing street ministry for 10 years. And so, uh, yeah, I don't think I ever questioned that there was a God.
It's awesome. You you are the epitome of the wise man who built his house upon the rock, because you talked about the firm foundation, and you've gone through stuff that many people wouldn't be able to handle. I mean, honestly, I've never lost a child, and the thought, just seeing one of my kids sick tears me up. The
Yeah.
thought of losing a child, it would definitely shake my faith. Like I'm firm enough now that I wouldn't doubt that God was in the storm, but I can't imagine. I know the song, Praise You in This Storm. I know all the Bible stories, the Shunammite woman, after her son died, it as well, having that strong faith. It's one thing to hear the stories, but it's another thing to walk through it. And you've had the loss of 2 children, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just lost a 38-year-old son in the end of January this year, and he and I were not real close, which in some ways is kind of a blessing. But he was my first child that was born uh, during my first marriage. We were in Houston, Texas, and but anyway, yeah, he passed away.
Hmm. Has your view of God changed throughout the years after seeing the loss and then coming through it since your early days of street ministry and stuff?
I think that what has happened is that my my perspective and my vision of who God is has changed a little bit. Maybe I would say it's matured some, right?
Mm.
And I guess I would say that I have a keener understanding of uh, the what's the word, omnipresence or omniscience.
Omniscient.
Yeah, of that. I think I have a sharper view of that. And uh, do I ever question or wonder? Do I have questions? Yeah, when I get to heaven, I got all kinds of questions,
Yeah.
right? I'm gonna ask Jesus to if I can pull up a seat and ask him some questions, and I'm sure he'll let me. And I'm sure he already knows what those questions are.
Yeah.
But but yeah.
Yeah. And I know you know the verse, all things work together for good. Through this, you started a podcast. You're helping other parents deal with the loss of grief. Do you feel like that's kind of a sense of purpose for you now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, loss and the circle of life is birth and death, right? Somebody told me not long ago that we don't ever get out of this alive. We're all gonna come to the end of our chapter, right? And hopefully, prayerfully, it'll be the beginning of eternity. In heaven, right? And you know, I would say that I sometimes wonder about that. You know, the finality of death. The end of the mortal being and the beginning of the spiritual being in heaven. And it's like, I mean, you may know somebody. I don't know anybody that's died and gone to heaven and come back and said, "Oh, this is a real thing," right?
Mm.
And you know, would that mean that we would believe them? Would we believe in heaven that much more? I don't know. We're kind of fickle
Right.
in
Right.
some ways. So, but anyway,
Do you think, did grief challenge your sense of masculinity in any way as a man when you were going through the grief and the loss and the struggle?
it helped me to recognize. the importance of emotional intelligence. You know, men um, men are not super emotional people,
Right.
right? We tend to suppress uh, painful emotions, right? And I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and back then men were told that men don't cry. And my father told me, "Don't cry, men don't cry. If you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about." You know what? It didn't make a whole lot of sense,
I've
but
heard that
anyway.
so many times.
Oh yeah, and you like you make yourself of who you like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and
Right, right.
you
Yep.
can become who you want to be. It's like you're the master of your own universe, and if you want to be a good person and you want to do positive things in life, then that's going to be because of what you do, and sadly enough, that's not true. Or not necessarily. I wouldn't. Why do I say sadly enough? I mean, that's not reality. But no, it didn't. It didn't challenge my masculinity, but it highlighted um, the the weakness of the
Mm.
male species, right? As far as emotional intelligence and handling your emotions constructively, maturely. Does that
So
make
what it
sense?
yeah. What did you learn through that? Is it okay to cry? Is it okay to share your emotions with your wife or,
Um,
a friend?
Is it okay to cry? I think that's a natural release that God placed within
Right.
us, right?
I'm being
It's a
facetious when I'm asking these questions. I
sure,
know it's okay to cry.
sure, sure. It's a certainly a pressure valve that we all need, men included. I think the female species is a little more in tune with uh, their emotions and are more uh, they demonstrate those emotions much more visibly than we do. Like, if I'm going to cry, I'm not necessarily going to do it in front of my wife. I'm going to go for a walk, right? Or I'm going to get in
Right.
the car and go for a drive. Or, as I walked through the aftermath of Jessica's passing, I'd be driving down the road and a song would come on, that I knew she liked. There were triggers that caused me to cry, right? And those were fast and furious in the beginning, right? 24
Mhm.
years later, like I couldn't have had this conversation back in 2005 or 2010 even, only because there's been such a long period of time am I able to sit here dry-eyed talking about this stuff, right?
Yeah, it so would you say the saying that time heals all wounds is accurate?
Um, there's a lot of wisdom to that, and I think that when people tell you to get over it, you don't ever get over grief. You don't ever get over losing a loved one because you love them. They're part of your who you are. They're part of your heart, your mind, your soul, your spirit. And so what time does is it allows you to adapt. It
Yeah.
allows you to adapt to those triggers and those things that trigger raw emotion, right? And it helps you to kind of compartmentalize, which is what us guys are good at. Helps us to compartmentalize that box of stuff, the emotions and the triggers and all of that. We kind of close the lid on it and set it over in a corner. And we know it's there. We know it's not going away. And a trigger will come along, at 5 o'clock in the evening when you're driving home. That's going to pop the lid on that thing, right? And at that point, you'll have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so,
So with the name Father's Refuge, do you think grieving men need refuge more than they need advice?
I think men need a safe place to listen and hear stories about this. And I think that they need a safe place
Sorry.
where they can share their own story, right? I think I think, I like the word refuge because it's a kind of like a strong tower or
Right.
a fortress that they can come into, right? And feel free to explore those emotions and come to grips with them, come to grips with the reality that they're in, wherever they're at in their journey.
Yeah. Have you seen anything change with I know you've just started this podcast, but have you like had people reach out to you and say, "Thank you for doing this. You've helped me in this area or
No,
that area"? No,
not yet.
not yet.
No.
Oh, obviously
Hopefully that'll
it's gaining
happen.
traction. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I can get some engagement. Um, but all about SEO and engagement and all that stuff that
Yeah, it takes
is in the
time.
background that we fuss about and fiddle with and try to game the system so that we can get the message out and get people to listen to all of the episode, not just the first 5 minutes or first 50 seconds. But
Right.
that's the goal. That's the hope.
Yeah. Throughout your time as a Christian, not just on the podcast, but I'm assuming, you've been in men's groups or stuff like that. You've gone to church most of your life. Have you
Sure.
seen a space where men can open up, and have you seen anything happen where a man has this space to not hold back anymore and just be able to open up and share his heart with other brothers? Have you
Oh,
seen that
absolutely.
happen?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The church we go to right now, they have life groups. And the pastor has one on Wednesday morning at, I don't know, 7 o'clock in the morning early where men can come and have, sausage biscuit and a coffee or orange juice or whatever. And they
Mm.
sit in a circle and he'll start it out and we'll go around the circle and people will talk about what's going on in their lives, prayer requests, struggles, what have you. And I think that's important, and I know the women have the same thing, they have a support group as well.
Yeah. It's a lot easier for women to open up than it is for men.
Right.
Like I lead a men's group at my church, and I've noticed if I have a group of 20, I'm going to get very few to speak.
Mhm.
But if I have a group of 5 and I can just go around the table asking questions, if I get one man to open up, it seems to open up the floodgates.
Right. Right.
That's what I believe will happen with your podcast. Once
Well,
it
I hope
starts,
so.
yeah. How
I think
how
that
have you and go ahead.
I was gonna say, with regards to that dynamic, I think men, uh, they kind of wall off that kind of stuff. They kind of
Yeah,
bury it and they keep it enclosed. Uh, Nobody wants to admit that they're weak. Nobody wants to admit from a man's perspective. Nobody wants to admit that they're struggling with emotion, you know.
right,
Nobody wants to admit that they, in their quiet space or their quiet time or, you know, uh, hey, I'm in the storm and it makes me cry, it makes me angry, it makes me cuss God, it makes me drink beer or Jack and Coke or, you know, act out in ways that are not healthy or not seen as Christ-like, right?
right.
Kind of embarrassing, but um, I think that inviting people uh, to I don't want to really say church, to be honest with you. I want to say that when you invite men into a safe place,
Right,
whether it be church or something else, it doesn't really, the building is just a building, but the
right,
community you want to build is amongst men, believers or non-believers, right? And so you want to provide a safe place, safe refuge, safe community to where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel threatened, where they feel, um, that they have the opportunity to hear other people tell their life stories and their struggles, and that alone will encourage them to open up some.
Yeah. What does leadership look like now for you compared to who you were before your loss and who you are now? Is it any different?
Um, well, I would say that, I spent 10 years in street ministry, and I've, uh, spent some time with, well, yeah, street ministry. When I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I was more active in frontline, active ministry. And I guess after Jessica passed away, uh, we went through a grieving period and went through a time of healing. And I would say that, thinking about leadership, I think the most important leadership role or position that a man has is his family. Right?
Right.
That's our number one role, and that's our number
Absolutely.
one calling. And if we can't lead our family, and if we can't be the type of father that our children desperately need in this world, then everything else we do on the outside of the family is kind of silly, right? It's really kind of devalued in my eyes, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean to say that a man that has a leadership role out in the community can't be effective in that. But I think that our effectiveness and our strength in that ministry through God is also rooted in I think the roots go back to our family, right? I think that's where our faith and our building blocks for our kids to teach them the faith that we have in God and who God is and why it's important, why is church important, why is prayer important, what does the Word of God really say about this, that, and another? Why is it important that Dad treat Mom with respect and be in ministry to her, right? And to be her leader and her covering. Does that
Right.
make sense? Right? And so my leadership in my family after Jessica passed away was probably, I was in the storm and I probably didn't pay as much of attention to that role as I should have.
Hmm.
And so
So, what did it look like you and your wife going through that grief together? Were you her support system and she yours?
actually no,
Hmm.
because we didn't know anything about grief or loss or how to handle it. And back in 2001, nobody encouraged us to go see a grief counselor. Nobody encouraged us to get, you know, therapists for our children or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we just kind of dealt with it, the best way we knew how. And a lot of times that was just suffering in silence,
Wow.
right? And just kind of sitting there watching this stuff swirl around us, wondering where was our family going to go, what we were going to look like on the other side. And in retrospect, hindsight's 2020. We can look back and see where losing Jessica really affected my other children, you know,
Yeah.
and still affects them to this day in a lot of
Hmm.
ways.
Let's shift gears for a little bit and talk about your other podcast, parenting adult children. Sorry.
No,
The
you're fine.
parenting adult children. Yeah. So when I first heard about parenting adult children, I was a little confused
Right,
because I as a 48-year-old man, I was an adult child. That's kind of how this whole thing started. I was immature as a man and I was in my late
right,
40s. And
right.
I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, but I see a lot
Well,
of adult children who need parenting.
man, we call them man childs,
Yeah.
a man child. Um, so in 2015, my wife and I had 2 children that were still teenagers, and they were giving me a run for my money. And I was like, I was doing everything I could to not kill them and wind up in prison with a boyfriend, right? And I told my wife, I said, I wonder if there are other parents dealing with this crap. And so I said, I was already on Facebook, and I said, let's just start a Facebook support group, for, I think it's called Tough Love. It's kind of, its title and its mission, has kind of shifted a little bit over the last 10 years. But, yeah, it's, parenting adult children. It's for parents, for encouragement and support of parents that have children that are the ages of 18 to 30. Before 18, they're teenagers. You got preteens, you got teenagers. At that point, you're still the parent, right? But
Right.
once they turn 18 and become an adult, your parent-child relationship is supposed to change. You're supposed to be the mentor. You
Right.
know, you can still provide financial support. They can still live at home if they're going to college, not going to college, get a job. And there's like 60 topics that we actually cover. There's all kinds of
Mm.
topics that we cover, and that swirl around the job of raising adult children. And the biggest role we have is with adult children is being a mentor and being a support system, and somebody that can listen instead of dictate. And failure to launch. I'm trying to think of some of the topics that we talk about. Boundaries is a big one. Self-care is a big one. Uh, and so the
Uh,
podcast speaks to parents as well, and speaks to the importance of parents taking care of their emotional, spiritual, mental, physical self, right? So
mm,
that they, you can't give people water if your cup's empty, right?
Right.
So it's very important, especially for moms. Moms are typically the primary caregivers, right? So I can talk for an hour about this, so stop me at any
Wow.
point.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would imagine boundaries. I am an adult parent. I have 2 grown daughters, and I actually have 3 grandchildren now.
Oh
But
wow,
when my so I got married really young. I was 19 when I got married. My youngest granddaughter was born when I was 42. So I have them call me Pop Pop because I didn't want to be called grandpa at the age of 42. It just didn't seem to fit. But
right,
my wife and I really struggled in the very beginning with not being the helicopter grandparents, I guess you will.
right,
We were
right,
giving my daughter and son-in-law all this advice, and we just being honest, we actually parented them more than mentored them. It took some time for us to figure that out, that through a lot of counseling and, discussions with our pastor and our mentors.
right.
It took time to back off, so I'd imagine boundaries is probably one of the hugest issues.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. So how does a Christian parent an adult child?
Well, the I guess the difference in a secular parent versus a faith-based parent is that you lean upon your relationship with Christ, and you do a lot of praying,
Yeah.
and you try to exhibit the fruit of the spirit when you're dealing with your children, right? I guess the hardest thing for parents to do is to let their children live their lives, right? Life is a magnificent teacher,
Right.
right? We can tell our children about all our screw ups. We can be transparent until we're purple in the face, and there's nothing wrong with being transparent with your children and say, hey, this is what dad did when he was 23 years old. And this is the mistake I made. This is how it affected my life. And if I had not done that, then things would have been better and different for me. But, I thought my parents were idiots and out of touch,
Mm.
and I think I was about 25 or 26 when I came to the realization that my parents weren't blithering idiots, that they weren't out of touch, and that the things that they'd been telling me all those years, there was some truth to that, you know. And
Yeah.
times change, people change, our cultures change to a certain degree, right? Things are different now than they were in the 1980s, obviously. But the core beliefs, our core beliefs in who God is and our faith in Him, and how we are to act individually as well as how we are to act towards our family, is pretty much the same. Hasn't really changed that much.
Why does it take us so long to figure that out? When
Because
I
we're
was
thick-headed.
19, right.
Yeah, we're
When I was
thick-headed,
19,
stubborn.
my dad was giving me so much solid advice that I was like, he didn't know what he was talking about.
Sure.
And about the same time, 26, 27, I should have listened to my dad. He
Hmm.
knew what he was talking about.
And as parents, we want our children to have a better life.
Right.
We don't want our kids to make the same stupid mistakes we made, and we want to throw up roadblocks and say, don't go around that barrier and do what I did, because if you do, you see the wreck on the other side of that roadblock. That was me. And this is,
Yeah.
one of the most important things. My parents weren't parents of faith either, but one of the things my parents taught me as a child and as a young adult was think before you act.
Hmm.
Think before you act. Well, why is that? Why do we need to think? Well, because your actions sometimes come with lifelong consequences,
Right. Yeah.
right? Sometimes the consequences are small and manageable, right? And only last a small period of time or a season. And in like I said earlier, life is a magnificent teacher, right?
Yeah.
Your parents can teach you a whole volume of stuff, but our kids, and we don't, and parents don't really want to come to grips with this, but our kids need to learn some lessons. You have to learn the hard way,
Yeah.
right? You can read a book and you can learn about theory and you can learn about processes and you can learn about other people's mistakes, but until it doesn't become reality and real to you until you're in those
Faced with
shoes,
it. Yeah.
faced with it and going, "Oh crap, I seem to remember something about this." And I think that afflicts all of us, you know.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to bump up against time a little bit.
Okay.
There's a question I ask every man that comes on the podcast. In 1 Samuel 22, David ran to the cave of Adullam. And I've read this once, since you have a podcast called The Father's Refuge. The cave of Adullam for David was a place of refuge. So when David was in that cave, the men of the kingdom became disgruntled, disheartened, discouraged. They came to David while he was in the cave. David inspired and led these men, and eventually they became his mighty men as he took over Judah and then Israel, became king of Israel. Modern day, you got a group of disgruntled, disheartened, discouraged men, maybe grieving men, in front of you, looking for direction, guidance, leadership. What would you say to them?
Oh wow, that's a tough question. I would try to find a way to encourage them and find a way to get them to go back to their roots. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um, I think that, and I chase rabbits a lot, and I'll try not to chase too many rabbits on this one, but I think that when you think about the storm, I'll praise you in the storm. I think we're as men. I think um, I think we're faced with all different types of storms and sizes of storms and intensity of storms, and I think that as we live in those storms, we we become super sensitive to how those storms are actually affecting us, right? Emotionally, physically, mentally, psychologically. And we get how do you say it? One dimensional
yeah,
instead of three dimensional, right? We lose we kind of lose sight of uh the 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 beginner and the author and finisher of our faith, right?
mm,
We being men, we like to solve problems, right? That's how we're wired. So while we're in those storms, we're looking for ways to solve the storm, right? To either move the storm out of the way or to help us to walk through the storm and unscathed or without a lot of damage, whatever our makeup looks like with regards to those storms. And I think that a leader will will kind of help snap those people out of those storms and shift their focus where it needs to be.
Yeah.
The focus doesn't need to be on the storms and the problems within. The focus needs to be on the author and finisher of our faith and
Yeah.
who is God in our lives and what's his purpose for our life, right? And I've got to, we'll do this on another episode maybe, but I have a story about how God got my attention. And I told you I spent 45 days in a street rescue mission, and I had my go to heaven salvation card. I had accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I knew where I was going to go when I died, and so when God got my attention, and I wound up at the Salvation Army or the no Star of Hope mission, I kept asking him, "What why why am I here? Why me? Because I already know who you are. I know that you died on the cross for my sins, and I knew that I needed to ask you for forgiveness of my sin and turn away from my wicked ways, and the quick answer, which is quite deep actually, was, well, James, it's not what you have done, it's what you haven't done. And he
Wow.
said, I have saved you because I have a purpose for your life. Your name is written in the Lamb's book of life because of what I did at the cross. And because of that, you can't live your life according to your will, but you need to live your life according to my will. And so that's what a leader does is he helps men to see what God's purpose for their lives is. Right. And which of course, obviously, the first purpose, if you're married and you got kids, the first purpose for your life is to be a godly man and a godly husband and a leader in your
Right.
family.
Yeah. Love that answer. I wish we had a little bit more time because now I want to hear more about
I don't
that story.
I don't really know where all that came from. I just kind of launched into it.
Call it the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to tell the story about my 45 days at the Star of Hope mission for sure.
Go
That was
ahead.
a wake
Go
up
ahead.
call.
Go ahead. We got a few minutes.
Well, I mean, I wound up I'll try to keep this short, but I wound up under a bridge in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas is the third largest city in the United States. But what caused me to wind up under that bridge with 3 plastic bags of belongings as a 20-year-old, 22-year-old, whatever, I was working as a security officer at a mall. Make a long story short, I lost my job at the security company at the mall. I was actually sleeping in the security office, which I got in trouble for when they found that out. They were like, "Yeah, you can't do that." I lost a
Hmm.
girlfriend that I was madly in love with. Her name was Mary Gingrich, and her nickname was Miss Piggy. And so that was a crush that I was crushed when I lost her. Anyway. So yeah, I wound up under a bridge with 3 plastic bags, and a Christian who owned a coffee distribution center, a little tiny warehouse close to that bridge. He saw me and he pulled over and started talking to me. He befriended me. He was nice to me. I told him my story. I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't a drug addict. I wasn't on the streets because of addiction. And he was like, "Well, I know this place, called Star of Hope Mission. And would you like to, I would like to help you. And would you like that? Would you like to come with me on the rest of my coffee route today? And I'll take you back to the warehouse." He had a little cot I could sleep on. I mowed grass to make money, blah, blah, blah. So he took me to the Star of Hope Mission and dropped me off. And he had talked to the director of Star of Hope Mission. And he took me in front of the Star of Hope mission and dropped me off with my 3 plastic bags. And I had a pocket full of cash that I had earned. And I saw these street people laying in front of the Star of Hope mission on cardboard boxes, stinky, smelly, cursing, just, drunk, whatever, strung out on drugs. And the first thing I told God was, I'm better than this. I puffed out my little, middle income white boy chest and said, I'm better than this. And so there was a hotel right across the street. I forget the name of it. Anyway, it was like a nightly, horrible place, but it looked like the Taj Mahal next to Star of Hope Mission, right? So I went over there and I wasted all my money on like 7 or 8 days of staying at the hotel, and I wound up on a piece of cardboard in front of the Star of Hope Mission with these street people that I felt
Wow.
like I was better, right? And so the director came out, and I finally went in. Actually, I went in. I finally went in, swallowed my pride, went in, and went to where the trustees or whoever the people that were running the Star of Hope mission and said, "Hey, my name's James Moffitt," and one of the guys looked up and says, "We thought you got dropped off like 5 or 6 days ago. We were wondering what happened to you." And I told him, and anyway, so I wound up, helping, with feeding the homeless, and I, you actually have to listen to the gospel message before every meal. And they have
Wow.
churches that would come in and preach the gospel, and they'd sing songs, and then they had counselors that would talk to the men, right?
Yeah.
And at some point during that 45 days, I asked one of the counselors, I asked God, "Why me, Lord? Why? What is it? What is it that I've done to deserve this?" Right? And the still quiet voice, the Holy Spirit, I guess, told me, "It's not what you've done; it's what you haven't done. You're not an addict. You're not an alcoholic. You're not a drug addict. You're not wife beater, or I wasn't in and out of jail or anything like that. What was my sin? Why was I there? Because I was proud. It
Hmm.
was a sin of pride." And when
Yeah.
I learned that my name was written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and that God had a holy purpose for my life, and that included living according to His purpose, I was like, that was like an epiphany. I was like, wow, are you kidding me? Really? There's more to this than my little salvation card? And
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot more to it, way more. So anyway, I
Man.
wound up befriending one of the Johnny Barton was his name. He was I was in my 20s, he was in his 40s, late 30s. He had just gotten out of seminary from the hills of Tennessee or whatever. We wound up being a roommate at one point, and I got involved in street ministry for about 10 years, and yeah, God, and even to this day I still have a heart for homeless people.
Wow. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have time to get into it, but I've also been through street ministry and still have a heart for homeless people as well. Yeah, I appreciate that story. I
Okay.
wish we would have
Amen.
led with that.
No, that's fun.
No,
I
it's
I have
good.
ma-
Yeah.
I have many stories.
No,
I'm full of stories. After
I'll have to.
64 years, I have full stories.
You don't show your age. I figured you a bit younger.
Well, there's an 8-year-old boy that's been trapped inside my body that every time I look in the mirror, he's like, "Dude, what's going on here?" I'm like, "I don't know." Here
I
I am. Here
totally
we
get
are.
that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to have you on again. If you got so many stories to share, for sure. We'll have another conversation. I
Amen.
just through this conversation we've had so far, I know a lot of men are going to be encouraged by it. So where can guys connect with you? I know they got your podcast, which we've mentioned.
Uh, the best way to get a hold of me would be my email address, which is james.moffitt, Moffitt, at pm.me. It's
Hmm.
james.moffitt at pm.me.
Yeah. And guys, go listen to James's podcast. I've listened to 1 or 2 episodes of the adult parenting, and James has a lot of insights to share, and I know you'll be blessed by his podcast. And get the word out for the Father's Refuge podcast, because I know there are many men out there who are dealing with grief that are scared to open up, and I do believe this podcast will help you with that.
Yeah,
James,
one
thank you
of
very
the
much.
Go ahead.
One of the things real quick, one of the things about Father's Refuge, its purpose is sort of morphing a little bit. Its primary purpose is for dads and fathers that are dealing with the treatment journey of their children. But when you talk about loss and grief, loss can be loss of a job, a career, it can be loss of a relationship. It can be like divorce or separation or, fill in the blank. There's a blank there. What is loss? And so I want to be inclusive of those other issues in life that causes loss and grief.
Awesome. James, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks
I
for
look
having me.
forward to having you on again.
Okay.
All right. God bless you.
If this conversation spoke to something you're carrying, grief, loss, pain, questions you feel like you haven't been able to say out loud, know this: you are not walking alone. You have other people in your corner. God is with you everywhere. God is omnipotent. We mentioned that in the episode. Everywhere you go, everywhere you look, God is right there with you. You are not alone. And if you feel like you're alone, something that I've heard in psychology podcasts, which I listen to a few of those, grief demands a witness. And if you are dealing with grief and loss and you haven't gotten it out, you need someone to talk to. Reach out. Reach out to a family member. Reach out to a mentor. Find somebody in your church. And if you're a man and you're struggling with something and you don't feel like you have anybody you can talk to, there are ways you can engage with me. If you're on YouTube, you can comment below. I think if you go to my channel, my email is in there in the channel. If not, you can find me. There are ways to find me. If you go onto one of the podcast platforms, the audio podcast, there is a send a text which sends me a fan mail that only I see. If you want to have a conversation, we can go back and forth, and I can give you an easier way to direct contact me, and we can have a deep conversation about it. I'm here for you. I've never started this podcast to do this for me. I'm doing this to help others. So I waxed on about that long enough. But if you need someone, don't hesitate to reach out, because it's very important to share what you're going through with others. Now, if this episode encouraged you, please share it with another man. If you got something out of this and you feel like so far, I'm pushing close to 100 episodes at this point. I would really love it if you've listened to one episode of this podcast and it gave you value. If you go to Apple and leave a 5-star review, it would really help the podcast grow. And I don't want it to grow for my benefit. I want to reach as many men as I can. I want to see lives change through the conversations that we're having. So I'd appreciate any kind of help. I also have a community you can join, which will be in the description. I am starting to add stuff into the classroom. This past week, I added a workout program you can do in there. And there you can have any kind of conversation you would like to. It's an open forum, and it's totally free. With that, and last thing, I'm going to have all 3 of James' podcasts in the show description. Go follow his podcast. So with that, stay strong, stay valiant, keep forging your path, and be blessed.